The 9 o'clock news has just started over on BBC One.
Now it's 10 o'clock news time.
Are dead in southern England's worst night since the war. The ferries beached, the trains are stopped, the roads are blocked. Now the insurance people say they'll deal with claims. In the Gulf, another tank is hit. America blames Iran. And they've got Jessica down the well, and she's all right. Good evening. The Queen and Mrs. Thatcher have both sent messages of sympathy tonight after southern England's most violent storm for 300 years. The Queen, who's at the Commonwealth meeting in Canada, says she's greatly distressed by the death and destruction. Gales of more than 100 miles an hour killed at least 13 people, injured hundreds more, and wrecked thousands of homes in the south and the east. The Home Secretary, Mr. Hurd, called it the worst night of disaster since the end of the war. Coast Guard say officially it was a hurricane. 7 people died under fallen trees, 3 died under collapsed buildings, power lines were cut, a third of the country was without electricity. London was blacked out for the first time since the Blitz. Trains in the south and east were stopped. In the city, share dealings were stopped and the foreign exchanges closed. Only a handful of London's high street banks opened.
The Meteorological Office is holding a full investigation to find out why weathermen failed to predict the storms. They, like the rest of the country, were taken completely by surprise. What they did know was that a deep depression surrounded by spinning winds had formed in the Bay of Biscay. They said it wouldn't get past the Channel, but the gales hit northwest Brittany around 11 o'clock last night and arrived at Dorset and Hampshire around midnight. By 3 in the morning, the storms were in London and the southeast. By 6, the gales were heading for the Midlands, and around 8 this morning, they'd left Humberside for the North Sea and Norway.
At one stage last night, Hampshire police said every major road in the county was closed. One man died when a tree hit his car. Others simply didn't see the obstacles in time. No one was hurt in this incident, one of dozens of minor crashes all over the south. But 2 firemen died and 4 were injured when a tree crashed onto their fire engine. They had been racing to one of thousands of emergency calls. At Barton-on-Sea in Dorset, a family narrowly escaped injury when the side of their flat collapsed. And in nearby Highcliffe, 90 pensioners had to be evacuated when their roof was ripped clean away. Inside, their rooms had been left wide open to the elements. One relative had rushed to comfort her elderly mother. Others told of their terror last night.
I heard a crack and a bang and something fell on my bed. Yes. And I got right under the bedclothes, right down and covered myself well over. And then somebody called out to us, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yes, we're under the bedclothes." And we could hear the man in the next flat calling, "Help, help."
At sea, the wind and heavy swell had swept away most of Shanklin Pier on the Isle of Wight. Its theatre and rows of amusement arcades were all lost. And on the Hampshire coast, a cargo ship was driven onto the sand where she stuck fast. The crew could only wait patiently for the next high tide to try and refloat her. Other smaller vessels weren't so lucky. All along the coast, small boats had been torn from their moorings and dumped unceremoniously onto the beach. Of the south coast towns, Brighton was perhaps hardest hit. In the city centre, trees were uprooted, and one of the stone minarets on Brighton's Royal Pavilion crashed through the roof onto a £90,000 carpet below. It could delay present restoration work by a year. Almost as expensive was the damage to light aircraft. Many had spent the night upside down, turned over like toys by the wind. Some gusts near Southampton were measured at 108 miles per hour, enough to flatten acres of woodland and bring down power cables all over the south. Some towns will be without electricity for a second night tonight, and the electricity board say it could be 3 days before some outlying areas get power back. And with the wind had come torrential rain. From the air, the extent of last night's flooding became apparent. Tonight, calm weather has returned to the south, but the clearing up has only just begun. James Mates, News at 10 on the south coast.
The 100-mile-an-hour wind swept along the Kent coast, leaving a trail of devastation. 2 British crewmen died when a 1,500-ton Cypriot bulk carrier sank outside Dover Harbour. 4 others were rescued. a Sea-Link cross-channel ferry ran aground at Folkestone. There were no passengers on board. Firemen helped the crew to safety. At a big hotel in Hastings, a massive chimney stack collapsed, ripped a 20-foot hole in the roof and crashed through 3 floors. One guest hung onto a door handle and was rescued as he hung in mid-air. An elderly couple plunged 2 floors down. The man died. His wife miraculously escaped, protected by a mattress.
We heard the voice of a lady in there, and I got her out about an hour later. But there was still her husband was missing, and he was found 7 o'clock this morning.
A 55-year-old woman died as she slept when a 20-foot tree smashed through her roof. A caravan site near Folkestone was wrecked. 20 families lost their homes. An old church collapsed, its spire ripped from the foundations. Few people escaped the effects of the storm. Damage to houses is being estimated in millions. Thousands of acres of land are underwater, and tonight Kent police warned there are more floods on the way. Phil Roman, News at 10 in the southeast.
In East Anglia, gusts coming off the North Sea at up to 90 miles an hour left a trail of destruction in their wake. In Harwich, the prison ship Earl William, with its 40 Tamil refugees on board, was holed just above the waterline and broke free of its moorings. Hours later, it was grounded and re-anchored safely. Off the Wash, oil rig workers had to be airlifted to safety when a support vessel drifted dangerously close, threatening to ram the rig. Many ships were grounded in the Thames estuary. Damage is estimated at hundreds of thousands of pounds. Others seeking a safe harbour were escorted through dangerous waters. Coast Guards received calls from more than 300 people who'd lost their boats during the height of the storm. The Force 11 gale brought down power cables right across East Anglia. 20,000 people were without electricity. Many could be cut off for some time to come. Lorries were picked up and simply cast aside as the winds blew across the bleakness of the fens. Incredibly, few serious injuries were reported. The villages were particularly badly hit. Cars were crushed as trees as tall as 50 feet were ripped out by their roots. Farmers joined council workmen and emergency services in their bid to reopen more than 100 blocked routes. But as dusk fell tonight in the city of Norwich, people made their way home in little more than a gentle breeze. There was little evidence of the hazards of the past 18 hours. Judy Laybourne, News at 10, East Anglia.
Londoners woke up to find the capital virtually paralysed. Millions had no electricity, no telephone lines, and no way of getting to work. In some cases, the 94-mile-an-hour gales wreaked such havoc, people had to abandon their homes. The tower block was evacuated because officials feared serious structural damage. Falling masonry was a hazard everywhere. A tramp was killed when a wall fell on him, and this man was badly burned when he lit a candle near a camping gas stove.
I was trying to put the container onto the gas stove, and it wouldn't go on. It was near the candle, and suddenly all the gas whooshed out and it ignited with the candle.
The gales simply ripped these garages apart. Roofs and walls were scattered over a wide area. Residents had to dig their cars out of the rubble, only to join the traffic jams picking their way through the debris. Suburban rail commuters attempting to get into town found all the trains cancelled on British Rail's network southeast, and people trying to get out of London on the intercity service got no further than the mainline stations. There were plenty of hopeful passengers queuing up for information, but no trains at the platforms to take them anywhere. London Bridge, normally chock-a-block in the rush hour, was virtually deserted as the city gents stayed at home. The big institutions were at a standstill. Power failures hit the computers and the stock exchange closed down for the day. So was any trading done.
Very pale shadow of the normal level of trade. Can you remember anything like this before? Never, no. Not even Christmas Eve or the big freeze up last year. No, it's exceptional.
The few money men who did make it into work found themselves at a loose end as the city ground to a halt. John Draper, News at 10, Central London.
The Prime Minister, who's now nearing the end of her stay in Canada for the Commonwealth Conference, said tonight the government will do all it can to help the storm victims. Mrs. Thatcher's staff in London kept her constantly informed.
We are obviously gravely concerned about the loss of life and the terrible experience that it must be for many, many people. I spoke to the Home Secretary at 8 o'clock this morning, our time, and I'm very relieved that the emergency services are working magnificently, as usual. and that things are steadily getting back to normal. I just would like to say how very much we sympathise with all of those who, quite out of the blue, suffered this disastrous experience, and will do everything we can to alleviate the suffering.
The royal parks and their special collections will take decades to recover from the damage caused by the storms. Staff at Kew Gardens, where hundreds of trees were uprooted, said it was like losing their own children.
The country's royal parks were appallingly damaged by the storm. At Syon Park, part of the National Butterfly Collection was devastated. A tree crashed through the roof of the temperature-controlled British section, which housed thousands of pounds worth of rare butterflies. Some survived, but at least 100 of the insects died. The cold air outside would have killed them almost immediately. Despite the problems, staff hope to be able to reopen tomorrow. At Kew Gardens, 500 trees, 1/3 of the stocks, are now uprooted. The gardens will be closed until further notice, disappointing tens of thousands of visitors who now will never see the world-famous botanical collection in its prime. Kew's Palm House was just one building destroyed by a tree. In the capital's other royal parks, the story is the same. Trees and branches litter Hyde Park, and those hoping to mess around in their canoes on the Serpentine were in for a disappointment. Experts say the gales couldn't have struck at a worse time.
They are in full leaf at this time of the year, which means that they provide a lot of resistance to the wind. In addition, the soil was very wet following the recent heavy rains, and this has weakened the adhesion of the soil.
As the clean-up gets underway, it's now clear that it will take at least a generation before the Royal Park's trees grow back to full strength. Simon Marks, News at 10, London.
The Central Electricity Generating Board says southern England had the most serious cut in power supplies for more than 20 years. The national grid almost collapsed in London and the southeast. At 4 in the morning, the electricity supply from Dungeness Power Station in Kent was cut off because the wind had blown debris onto power lines. By 5:30 a.m., 15 million people were without electricity. The grid failed to supply the stations normally used to service peak morning demand. Emergency generators and batteries were brought into action, and from 8:30, the grid began to operate normally again. The Home Secretary, Mr. Hurd, praised the unstinting work of the emergency services at a special meeting of ministers in Whitehall.
Ministers had to negotiate 2 fallen trees to get to their meeting, some with less success than others. Energy Secretary Cecil Parkinson told his colleagues how the electricity service coped, while other senior ministers from key government departments praised the police, emergency services and local authorities for what the Home Secretary Douglas Hurd described as unstinting work.
Local authorities, emergency services, public utilities, coping resiliently and well. And provided the weather continues to moderate, we should continue to make good progress back to normal.
The Home Secretary doesn't believe the present emergency system needs to change. Now the emergency services take the first shock. They alert local authorities, who themselves have emergency planning and can call in the army if necessary. The Home Secretary wouldn't say if there will be financial help for clearing up, but insurance companies have reassured householders with policies.
What they're not covered for is fences. Fences and gates they don't have cover for against storm. Everything else, there is insurance cover there. There will be a small amount to pay, probably £15 or £25. You will have to pay the first part of the claim. The rest of it is covered by storm, by falling trees, by accident breakage of glass sections. In your policy, there's no problem.
As yet, no one can even begin to guess what it's all going to cost. Sarah Cullen, News at 10, Whitehall.
The emergency services have complained they had no warning of the storm. Weather forecasts on television, radio and in newspapers all failed to predict the hurricane-force winds. Moderate breezes of up to 18 miles an hour are quite common in Britain. If they develop into gales, that's up to 46 miles an hour, most people would have difficulty moving about. 63-mile-an-hour winds mean storms and trees uprooted, and speeds up to 75 miles cause violent storms and widespread damage. Hurricanes officially begin at over 75 miles an hour. In southern England, gales were blowing at over 100 miles an hour.
The general public was given no effective warning on television yesterday of a devastation that was about to strike Britain.
Earlier on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't.
But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy, but most of the strong winds, incidentally, will be down over Spain and across into France.
The media get their information from the Meteorological Office at Bracknell. Today they admitted they did seriously underestimate the weather approaching Britain.
It's true that we didn't actually stress the wind, that's absolutely correct. We did expect some strong winds around, but not as extreme as certainly occurred.
How do you feel about that?
Obviously a bit sore. We would like to do better, of course, every time.
The Met men admit that even in these days of computers and satellites, they have still got blind spots.
This particular depression developed down to the southwest of the British Isles. There's not much observations from there, and even with satellites these days, there's still quite large gaps. They still don't really know what's going on at all the places, and when something comes up from a sea area, it's only when it really reaches the land that you begin to be aware exactly what's happening.
The first severe weather flash was issued after midnight. Too late, the Met men admit, to be of any practical use to the public. David Rose, News at 10 at the Meteorological Office.
Forecasters promise the high winds are over, though it will remain breezy. But there will be showers, mostly in the west and spreading to the rest of the country later. Temperatures should be slightly higher than today. And British Rail say most services in the southeast should be back to normal by the morning, though trains in Kent will be disrupted until Sunday lunchtime.
The United States has accused Iran of an outrageous attack on a tanker under American colors in Kuwaiti territorial waters today. A report next. Plus, they've got to Jessica after 2 days drilling. And Mrs. Reagan's going to hospital. She may face surgery for breast cancer. That's in a couple of minutes.
On every American Express card, there is one word we take very seriously. Member.
American Express customer service.
To us, membership means personal service.
Managed to lose my wallet.
Mr. Gardner, I'll have a new card for you by tomorrow.
Terrific. I'll pick it up myself. And thanks for cancelling the old one.
Goodbye.
And for you, membership opens up a whole world of opportunities.
It's great. Don't deliver it. I'll ride it home.
Ah, that'll do nicely.
I adore Seville, but I couldn't bear to leave Spain without spending a couple of days in Barcelona.
I can arrange that for you.
Sorry we're so late.
But we made an assured reservation.
American Express, of course. We've kept your rooms for you.
Athens. Tonight? Yeah, sure.
Unpacked. American Express card members know that membership has its privileges. To find out more, phone us free on 0800 400 406 now.
Everyone knows how vulnerable car radio aerials can be. But do you know who's building damage-proof aerials into the rear windows of many of their latest cars today? Increasingly, the same people are now making central locking standard, and not just on luxury models. They're also fitting more of their cars with rear wash wipers. And you'll even find that cruise control is standard on their smartest models. Ford. Not only are they adding more equipment to their cars without adding more to their prices,